All right. Good morning, everyone. And thank you all for being here today. My name is Amanda Bebrin. I'm the Director of Housing Advocacy at the CDP, Community Development Partnership. Today's workshop is Economic Development 101, the intersection of housing and small business growth. This is the third workshop in the Lower Cape Housing Institute 2025-2026 curriculum, and it is the very first time that we have done this particular workshop, so it's a momentous occasion. I'd like to thank the 8 community preservation committees from across the Lower and Outer Cape for providing funding that supports this program. And while I'm doing some introductory remarks, I would love to find out who's in the room with us today. So if you could all put your names and affiliations in the chat, we'd love to know who you are and where you're coming from. So my colleague, Pam Andersen, is going to talk about the CDP and our mission and our work. So I'll limit myself to just giving the context of the Lower Cape Housing Institute, or LCHI, this program. And it's a program that provides education, resources, and support to the municipal officials and staff of the 8 Lower and Outer Cape towns. We hold a series of workshops on advanced housing topics like this one. All of our workshops are recorded and available on our YouTube channel so that you can watch them anytime. We also host quarterly peer groups, which are a less formal space for town officials and housing advocates to connect, share ideas and updates, and build relationships across town lines. My team also offers technical assistance and individual support as needed. So if you have a local government or affordable housing question, we'll either know the answer, track it down for you, or be able to tell you who to ask about it. Last year, our curriculum was focused on exploring the different intersections of housing with other sectors and areas, in recognition of the fact that most conversations about the region's challenges eventually come back to housing, and usually pretty quickly at that. So this year, we're really excited to be focusing on one such intersection, economic development. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Pam, to introduce herself and to get us into today's agenda, So Pam, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everybody. I'm Pam Andersen. I'm the Director of Business and Credit Programs for the Community Development Partnership. I have been working with the organization for 15 years and have been working with small businesses for 14 of those. So, we're thinking about, some of you might be asking yourselves, why are we including economic development as part of our Housing Institute? Well, over the last 2 years, the CDP has impaneled an economic development committee to look at the work we do and where we should go in the future. And every single conversation that we had came back to housing, showing us that this is a huge intersectionality and an important thing for small businesses. So it's a great fit, and today we're going to talk about several things. We're going to talk about strengthening the understanding of how small businesses operate in our region, provide some terms and definitions, share a short description of the CDP's work with small business, present some local data to ground our discussions with help from Chloe Schaefer from the Cod Commission. Then we're going to debunk some common misconceptions or myths that may influence policy or expectations around small business. And finally, highlight how small businesses contribute to our community and how town officials and community members can make a difference. So the CDP's mission is to build a strong, diverse, year-round population for the Lower and Outer Cape that can afford to live, work, and thrive here. And one of the ways that we accomplish that is through nurturing the launch and growth of small businesses. So I'm going to give you a brief description of sort of what we do. We offer technical assistance, which is sorry, I got something popped up. So technical assistance is free one-on-one consultation for small business owners, which includes a variety of things from record keeping in QuickBooks to policies to even being someone's accountability partner. Small businesses working on their own need somebody to help keep themselves on track. Since the CDP came into existence, we have worked with over 3,200 small businesses in our Lower and Outer Cape region. And in 2025, we worked with 301. So what does the small business owner look like that we work with? Most of them average around 4 employees, and many are an owner-only business. Many of them are low to moderate income business owners. More than 50% fit that category. Some of the industries we've worked with are shown here. Under landscaping, it includes gardeners, plumbing and heating, remodeling, interior design, general construction, architecture, restoration. With artists, it also includes galleries, theaters, and photographers. Many retailers, restaurants, activities, services, business to business includes web design, marketing, consulting, coaching, computer services, accounting, record keeping, and personal services includes acupuncture, personal help, pet services, pet grooming, hairdressers, barbers, physical therapy, cleaning, and tattoo and automotive. So there are many different areas of types of businesses that we've worked with. We also offer a microloan program, and our targeted audience for this loan program is for business owners that haven't been able to obtain a loan from a commercial bank, and there's many different reasons that can happen. In the last 30 years, we have provided over 4.6 million in microloans to start and sustain 260 small businesses, and in the past 10 years, over 2 million to 95 businesses. We also provide workshops. Coming up in January, our first kickoff for the year is our QuickBooks Online workshop. And we also offer TA around QuickBooks because we want every business owner to be able to keep their record keeping up to date, understand where they are, and be able to make good decisions. We also work with We Can on their Grow program as another program that we offer training around. This year, we have a new program that we're working on, and we were able to get some funding to offer startup grants to a group of new family childcare providers. And we're working with Clarendon on this program. We just started marketing this yesterday, and we're very excited for this opportunity. We're going to have info sessions in December so that potential family childcare owners can learn more about it. We've been working for the past 15 years with the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance on the Cape Cod Fisheries Trust Scallop program, where we manage the lease program and help allocate this resource to the small boat fishing fleet. We meet with people in our offices in Orleans, but we also offer regional office hours at the 204 Municipal Building in Harwich and Provincetown Commons to be closer to people where they are. We also meet with people via Zoom or telephone, and they can schedule an appointment without having to talk to us, which has been a great feature that we implemented during COVID. For outreach, we have a monthly Inside Scoop newsletter that we send out to over 1,000 people. And we also have a monthly business update. So we share programs that we have going on and other things going on in the community and beyond for small business owners. We have a client referral program. So any of you, if you know of a business that needs some small business technical assistance, as we call it, if they tell us that you referred them, we do a monthly drawing for a gift card, and we buy those gift cards from local businesses that we've worked with or collaborated with. So it's a win-win-win. To get the word out more, we even participate in networking and connect events through the chamber and other local resources. And we collaborate with many, the list is larger than this, but many different organizations across the lower Outer Cape and beyond. So now we're going to talk about some small business statistics. You will see reference to this vocabulary throughout the program today. So we wanted to provide an introduction to these terms and a refresher for those of you who are already familiar with them. If we find more during the session, we can always add them to the list. So a community development financial institution is a specialized institution that provides financial services to low-income and underserved communities. This can be banks, credit unions, loan funds, or venture capital funds, and they receive a certification from the U.S. Department of Treasury. This certification allows them access to various programs and funding and technical assistance from the CDFI fund. A community development corporation, like the CDP, is a nonprofit organization that works to revitalize and improve economically distressed or low-income communities through projects like affordable housing, job training, small business support, and community organizing. These locally based organizations often serve a specific geographic area, such as a neighborhood, town, or region, as we do, and provide help with quality of life for their residents. An economic development corporation is an organization, often a nonprofit, that promotes economic growth in a specific geographic area by attracting new businesses and existing ones, helping existing ones to expand. AMI, or area median income, is the income for a specific geography that is used in the calculation for affordable. Low to moderate income housing programs use the HUD income calculations, where half of households own more and half own less than that calculation. So low is 50% of area median income, and median is 80% of area median income. A community development block grant is a flexible funding source from HUD that supports local community development projects, primarily for low to moderate income individuals. Funds can be used for a wide range of activities, including housing, rehabilitation, public infrastructure improvements like water and sewer, public facilities, and economic development. A Paycheck Prevention Program, or PPP, was a COVID crisis program for small businesses. And these applicants that were able to participate in this were able to get loan forgiveness. And this was a program of the Small Business Administration. Working capital represents funds available for day-to-day operations for a business. And the balance sheet for a business is that their assets equal their liabilities plus owner's equity. And this is at a given point in time. So often people look at this at the end of their fiscal year. Now I'm going to continue a little bit more on vocabulary, just so that we can see how these things fit in later on in the presentation. So P&L, many people call it, or a profit and loss statement, is an organization's income and expenses over a period of time. So for a year, it would be January 1st through December 31st of that year. Revenue streams are all those streams that a business has coming in as part of their revenue. It could be an online store, it could be a pop-up, it could be an actual brick and mortar location. And their total revenue is all of those added together. Cost of goods sold, or some people call it COGS, C-O-G-S, is the labor and materials that go into a product. If you didn't have the product to sell, you would not have these expenses. And the gross profit is all of those revenues minus the cost of goods sold. The gross profit margin is that gross profit divided by the revenues to give you a percentage. Then you take all of your expenses and add them up to get your total expenses. And the net profit is the money left over after all expenses have been deducted from that gross profit line. And the net profit margin is the net profit divided by the revenue. And we're going to come back to this last number in a little bit. So keep in mind that annual margin of 5% on a $50,000 a year business is only $2,500 in net profit. So the SBA defines small business as having fewer than 500 employees. And nationally, that's 99% of all businesses fit into that category. When you look at employers on Cape Cod with more than 500 employees, there are only a handful. We have two with more than 1,000, which is Cape Cod Healthcare and Hui. Both of them are not for profit. And with more than 500, we have the Chatham Bars Inn, Ocean Edge, Steamship Authority, Nantucket Airlines. Those are all ones that I thought would be familiar to you all. And then we also have employers in our area, which include municipalities, and they range from 50 to 150 employees. And I put an asterisk next to that because in a lot of the data that I looked at, it was hard to differentiate year-round versus seasonal in those numbers. But Cape Cod data shows us that 67% of Cape Cod businesses have fewer than 5 employees. That's significantly lower than the state of Massachusetts, which comes in at 55%, and the national average of 56%. So some other small business facts from the SBA. We talked about the 99% are small. Small businesses, there are over 34 million small businesses in the United States. Over 45% of the American workforce, and that's 61 million people work in small businesses. Those small businesses account for 43% of the national GDP. They pay 39% of the private sector payroll. And when you look at job creation in the chart to the left, 2/3 of all new jobs are created within the small business sector. When we look at business and owner demographics, 44% of small business owners are women, 18% are immigrants, 5% are veterans, 27% are family owned, and 9% of workers are self-employed. That means they've created a job for themselves. And some other small business and government statistics. Small businesses receive 26% of federal contracting dollars. Those firms account for 33% of all US exports. Over the past few years, there's been a significant surge in new business applications, over 5 million annually since 2020. Now, we did have a big dip in 2020. And the SBA loan data shows that over $102 billion in loans have been given out to US businesses with revenues less than $1 million. Now, when you think about this, in our current environment, what are businesses thinking about where we're going? And there was a Mass Inc. report that came out last week, and the results of the survey showed that business confidence dropped again in October, making it the 8th straight month, the longest rut since the pandemic. Businesses are unsure about what degree of burden they should expect from tariffs, the government shutdown, and they're worried about the downstream effects of federal funding cuts on their businesses. We have to look at survival rates for small businesses as well, because there's a lot of statistics out there on that topic. And we can see from this that 67% of businesses survive 2 years, 34% survive 10 years, and then there's a smaller percentage that survive longer. Now, an interesting statistic, though, is that on Cape Cod, or in Barnstable County, the 53% of businesses are more than 11 years old. That's significantly higher than the national average. But this also means that many of those businesses might be looking to move on. Are they looking to retire? Are they looking to sell and, open a new business or do something else? And in a response to this statistic, one of the other sessions that we're going to have on that intersectionality between small business and our communities is around exit planning for small businesses. And that will be in April. And what are some of the reasons for small business failures? There's a definition here of what the SBA considers a small business failure. And generally, people think about that from a financial standpoint. And that's true. Many of them fail because they financially couldn't continue. But sometimes it's that they didn't have an effective marketing plan. Sometimes it's weak leadership. Many times it can be burnout. Burnout is very challenging for small business owners. It can be because they're not getting what they want out of a business, or that they can't provide the right kind of work-life balance or flexibility that they were expecting when they started that business. Cake.com reports that the main reason behind business startup failure is 38% is running out of cash or failing to raise new capital. And we're going to see some other information about how easy or difficult it is for small business owners to be able to get loans and funding. And then that statistic is followed by a lack of market need for some of those products. And so sometimes they didn't do enough research prior to starting that business. So we have to think about, why do business owners start a business? Many of them want to be their own boss, have greater income, have a better work-family balance, better flexible hours. But with a lot of the business owners that I've worked with here on the Cape, funnel it down to the very bottom. Not necessarily for us, they couldn't find a job, but they couldn't find a year-round job to help support them and their families. And so the largest number of businesses that I work with are creating a job for themselves so that they can work potentially year-round in that area. So now I am going to pause, and I'm going to turn it over to Chloe Schaefer from the Cape Cod Commission.
Great, thanks, Pam. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I am going to give you a bit of an onslaught of data here. I know it'll be a lot, but hopefully help kind of set the context a little bit for the economy in the Lower and Outer Cape, and kind of that context within the region of the Cape as well. And then I'm also going to share a little bit about our comprehensive economic development strategy. So hopefully slides are good going. Jumping into the Lower and Cape economy, I'm going to start with some data from the decennial census, looking at our year-round population. The region generally saw a pretty significant increase in population between the 2010 and 2020 decennial censuses. Some of the Lower and Outer Cape towns really had some of the greatest proportional increases in population, Provincetown increasing by almost 25% over those 10 years. And certainly other towns, Eastham as well, Wellfleet, almost 30%. So certainly some significant increases proportionally, though the Lower and Outer Cape towns are some of the least populous in terms of year-round population in the region. And when we look at the percent of the population that's under 18 years of age, we certainly can see that the Lower and Outer Cape towns, as well as the region and Massachusetts as a whole, are aging. That percent of population under 18 years of age declining between the 2010 and 2020 censuses here. And again, the Lower and Outer Cape towns, in many cases, having a lower percentage of the population under 18 years of age relative to the region. And with that decline happening over the last 10 years. Massachusetts as a whole is almost 20%, about 19%. The region's about 14%, and collectively the Lower and Outer Cape, that's about 11.5% of the population. And kind of along similar lines, looking at the median age, Lower and Outer Cape town median ages tend to be a bit older than the region, and the region is much older than the state, as you can see there, 55 relative to almost 40. And so it's kind of some of the key takeaways here when we think about our year-round population. Certainly it has grown between the 2010 2020 censuses, but we are seeing an aging population with that population under 18 declining. Also corresponding with that, between the 2013, 2014, and 2023-2024 school years, the public school enrollment in Lower and Outer Cape schools decreased by about 12%, which was just a little bit higher than the decrease throughout the Cape. So moving on to housing. I'm sure it's not news to any of you, but certainly we've seen a tremendous increase in the cost of homes in the region. This year is showing the median single-family home sales prices from 2019 to 2024, so really pre-pandemic to 2024, which is the most recent year we have annual data for. As you can see, some tremendous increases across the board, but certainly some really more astounding, looking at Truro, which went from about 790,000 to almost 1.5 million. Chatham also 1.4 million, the median single-family home sales price last year, but certainly expensive throughout the Lower and Outer Cape towns, generally more expensive than the region as a whole, and certainly more than the state. Certainly, we can't talk about our housing landscape without thinking about its use and the seasonality of it. So here you can see the occupancy of housing units throughout all the Lower and Outer Cape towns, as well as the region and the state. Certainly, the red being the percent of housing stock used seasonally. Many of the Lower and Outer Cape towns, that is around or more than half of the housing stock. Much smaller proportion of homes are used as year-round rentals or occupied by year-round renters in the region in those towns relative to the state. And of those year-round occupied homes, though we do see a significantly larger percentage that are occupied by owners relative to the state as well. You can see for the state, seasonality is about 4%. For the region, it's about 34%. And here you can see certainly that in a lot of the Lower and Outer Cape towns, it's much more than that. For those year-round renters, though, who are living in Lower and Outer Cape towns in the region, we see a significant percentage of them in many of those towns that are cost burdened. This is looking at spending more than 30% of annual income on housing costs. In many towns, it's around or over 50% again. Regionally, throughout the Cape, we're seeing about 53%, and the state is about 48%. This is only looking at renters, but certainly also many of our owners who are in homes already are also cost burdened, have high housing costs relative to their income. And for those who are looking to purchase a home, we know that in many cases that is out of reach. The income needed to affordably purchase a home really outstrips the existing median household income across all 8 towns, as well as the region. Regionally, it's about $230,000 needed to affordably purchase a median priced home, which is more than double the actual median household income. In some of the Lower and Outer Cape towns, we see numbers more like around 270,000, Chatham even over 300,000, which is again significantly more than the actual median household income. You can also see kind of that larger dashed line here are the average wages of jobs within each town and each region, those being less than the median household income as well, but looking at what someone might typically earn from a single job in the region, that's what you're looking at with those numbers. So certainly that makes the gap in many cases even larger. Just some of the highlights again here as we think about our housing landscape. Certainly the tremendous seasonality of the housing stock in the region is really an important factor as we think about kind of the different pressures on the housing facing the Cape and the Lower and Outer Cape as well. Again, we have a much smaller percentage of occupied units being occupied by renters compared to owners when looking at that relative to the state. And certainly that gap again between actual median household income and what someone would need to earn or a family would need to earn to be able to afford that median priced home, really significant. In all cases, more than $100,000 here, and in some cases more than $200,000. So significant gap to try to close for sure. Diving into that median household income a little bit more specifically, in all but a few of the lower and outer Cape towns, median household income is kind of right around, or even in some cases more than that of the Capes, though there are certainly some that are lower. There are a couple that are even higher than the states, but the state's median household income a bit higher than the region as a whole. However, there's also several lower and outer Cape towns where the estimated percent of the population that's living at or below the poverty level is relatively high. In Provincetown, it's about 12%, Orleans and Brewster nearing 11%. Those are higher than the state and the region, but there are a handful of towns where it's estimated to be lower than the region as well. Truro, Wellfleet, and Harwich being those three. Looking at our labor force participation rate, what we can see here is certainly kind of the impacts of, in many cases, an older and larger retiree population. In many towns, labor force participation rate significantly lower than the state, and as well as lower than the Cape as a whole. Provincetowns is the one outlier here. It's a little bit higher at 68%, which is closer to that of the state. But I will say, and I should have caveated this before, a lot of this data is American Community Survey data, which is kind of the best that we have available in terms of looking across all of our towns and the region and the state, and having that standardized data set. But certainly for some of these smaller towns, there are some larger margins of error, and that might be something at play there. But there also could simply be a higher labor force participation rate in Provincetown. But kind of more broadly speaking, certainly fewer people are participating in the labor force throughout the lower and outer Cape and the region as a whole. Again, as I mentioned, due to kind of our older population and their greater proportion of retirees living here. Pam kind of started to touch on this, but certainly we also see a lot of people who are self-employed throughout the lower and outer Cape and the Cape as well, higher than that of the state, kind of between 15 to 20% in most towns, some towns being a bit higher, and about 15% in the region. And also, as we just heard, certainly the vast majority of our businesses are small businesses. They have fewer than 10 employees here. Really, 85 to 90% of businesses in all towns in the lower and outer Cape being establishments with 10 or fewer employees, which is more than what we see at the state level at about 74%. Again, our economy certainly is very seasonal, and this is certainly even more acute in our lower and outer Cape towns. Here you can look at the unemployment rate over the course of 2024, seeing those high unemployment rates in the winter that really decline in the summer. In many cases in the summer, our unemployment rate is less than that of the states as a whole. But that dashed line across all those graphs is the states, and you can see how it remains kind of relatively steady. Certainly has some fluctuations, but doesn't have these wide swings that we see throughout our region. Provincetown going from about 21% to less than 4%, but certainly even those towns that have kind of those less extreme swings still see some significant shifts in terms of their employment throughout the year, whether it's the on season or the off season. So certainly something to think about as we think about our economy and kind of the need for more year-round employment opportunities as well. And then I'm just going to show a couple of towns here, looking at kind of the top 5 industries in terms of employment in those towns, the average wages of those relative to their median household income and the income needed to affordably purchase a home. Here's Wellfleet. A significant proportion of employment throughout the year is concentrated in accommodation and food services, about 28%. Those annual average wages are just at about $48,000. You can see construction, highest average annual wages here at about $65,000. And then healthcare and social assistance at about 6.7%. and about 54,000 at the lower end there. Certainly the lowest in terms of average wages is retail trade, and for Wellfleet, that's the third highest industry in terms of employment, but only about $36,000 in terms of average annual wages, certainly much less than the median household income, and a lot less than the income that would be needed to affordably purchase that median priced home. So certainly multiple earners or multiple jobs would be needed to help address that gap. Chatham, kind of a similar story here. Again, accommodation and food services really at the top, about 29% of employment throughout the year, and those wages at about 46,000, as well as retail trade next at about 15% of employment, and 41,000 for average wages. Again, a significant gap between household income and that income needed to afford housing. These are kind of similar stories to the region as a whole. Accommodation and food services, healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, construction, really being in those top 5 industries in terms of employment throughout the Cape, as well as those towns specifically. But we do see there is a bit more of a concentration of employment within accommodation and food services in most lower and outer Cape towns relative to the region, or in many of them. And certainly here it's about 16%, 15%. We're looking for each of our top 3 industries versus things like 28 and 30%. But similar story here again, just that large gap between what people are earning and their incomes and what is needed to afford housing. And then in terms of looking at kind of workplace patterns, where people are working and how they're commuting. So there's a large proportion of jobs in the lower and outer Cape that are filled by people coming from outside of those 8 towns, about 45%. About 54% of people who are living in the region are fulfilling jobs outside of those 8 towns. Again, a lot of people are also working from home, a bit more compared to the region or the state here. In some of the towns, over 20%, whereas regionally it's about 14.5%. Most people are driving alone to their work, and this is true throughout the Cape, but Provincetown is an exception here, where only about a third of people, or a little bit more, are driving alone. So some of those key takeaways in terms of income and employment, as I mentioned, there's kind of a greater proportion of jobs focused in accommodations and food services, and those, while it's highly seasonal throughout the region, certainly those industries do tend to represent a greater proportion of employment in our lower and outer Cape towns and Provincetown. That average monthly employment in accommodation and food services is about 40%. Versus about 16% regionally. And again, all really primarily focusing in small businesses. Again, that's at about over 80% of businesses having fewer than 10 employees. And then in the lower right here, speaking to the fact that in many cases, certainly the average wages of individual jobs or for an industry were much lower than a household income. It suggests that there's either multiple earners within a household, or people are receiving other sources of income, such as rental income or dividends. And here you can see in that chart that there is a large percent of resident households that are receiving those types of income throughout the lower and outer Cape, as well as the region as a whole, generally more than the state. So just kind of, again, some of the really key highlights here in terms of thinking about our population and economy and housing, and how those kind of are all important as we consider initiatives and planning work that we advance. Certainly an aging population. The seasonality is really critical as we think about both our housing stock and our employment and the economy, and that people really, in many cases, are commuting to their jobs, not necessarily able to live and work in their communities, and that housing certainly is unaffordable for most households if they're looking to purchase a home today. So now I'm going to shift just a little bit and provide an overview of our comprehensive economic development strategy. This is from 2024. We completed it last year. And the comprehensive economic development strategy, or the CEDS, is something that we complete every 5 years. It's a strategic plan for economic development in the region. And it includes an action plan with kind of those key goals and priorities for the region's economy and moving it forward. The CEDS is required for maintaining our economic development district designation. This is a designation from EDA, and what this does is it enables the region as a whole to access funding, certain grant funds from EDA, as opposed to without that designation, it's really only certain census tracts or towns that would be eligible. So it's really important in that sense. And what it does is it lays out an economic vision for the region, kind of put succinctly at the top there is a strong and vibrant Cape Cod, but certainly provides more nuance and details below that. Really a region that's resilient, inclusive, and diverse in terms of its year-round community, that it has access to housing options and high quality business education and employment opportunities, and certainly also making sure that we are protecting and preserving our natural and cultural resources, which are critical to the kind of identity of the region, and also certainly for our economy and what brings people to the Cape in many cases. So that vision is supported in advance through 6 different goals that are grouped in the categories of people, places, and economy, and I think really help to underscore the fact that all of these things are really related and play a key role in our economy, even though in many cases they might be kind of considered as issue areas on their own. So they include goals for housing attainability, ensuring that we have a supply of different types of housing that suits the range of incomes and different needs of our residents and employees. And here each goal also has some objectives to try to kind of help provide some greater context around what the goal is. So looking at things like increasing the diversity in housing options and preserving year-round housing. It also has a goal for community and looking to strengthen the sense of community in the region. This includes protecting our kind of cultural resources and assets, but also fostering more engagement among the community members as well. And some of the objectives here, looking to advance our protections of historic resources and continue to highlight stories of our underrepresented populations, as well as also providing support and resources for local businesses and entrepreneurs as they look to build and expand their businesses and provide those opportunities as well. Under places, there's a goal for infrastructure, certainly really critical that we have infrastructure within the region that provides those services we need, whether it's transportation, telecommunications, wastewater infrastructure, really make living and working in the region feasible. Certainly also infrastructure to and from the region, such as the bridges, important. So some of the objectives, looking to invest in those infrastructure projects that are necessary to support vibrant communities in the region, including looking at walkable development, as well as making sure that our infrastructure is resilient to potential climate change and other impacts. And then also under places, we have a natural resources goal, really looking to protect and restore our vital natural and coastal resources, which certainly play important roles as in and of themselves for different species, habitats, but also in terms of our economy. And so looking to really protect those habitats, improve our water quality, and continue to raise awareness of how important those are for our local and regional economies as well. And then within economy, a workforce development goal focused at really supporting growing a local workforce within the region, making sure that we're supporting and aligning training opportunities with the needs of our local employers, and providing education and training opportunities for key industries in the region, as well as potentially higher wage jobs. And then economic diversity and resiliency, that goal, really looking to help foster new and different industries that still capitalize on our competitive advantages, like our access to the coastline, but that can also improve our resiliency both now and into the future. And the SEDS also outlines 10 key actions. Each of these address at least one, if not more, in most cases more, of the different SEDS goals I just outlined. So things like incentivizing year-round housing, certainly looking to advance housing attainability and community goals, looking to simplify appropriate housing development, looking at different zoning changes or other methods through which we could do that. Another action other things like providing opportunities for organizations and entrepreneurs to pilot ideas. So addressing both the community goals and the economic diversity and resiliency goals as well. Also things looking at like investing in water quality and wastewater infrastructure, addressing our infrastructure and housing goals, but also our natural resources goals as those efforts look to protect and restore our water quality. So certainly a lot of actions here, not going to go into any of them, but they're all in the plan. And they also speak to the fact that there's a lot that the commission can do, certainly in terms of facilitating and convening organizations. And there are some of these key actions that we ourselves can advance, but in many cases, we aren't necessarily the only organization that can advance them. So there's a lot of partners listed and other lead actors on these different actions. And certainly it'll take collaborative effort to advance these. And then lastly, the SEDS also includes an evaluation framework. There are kind of 3 prongs to this. One is qualitative indicators. This is really looking at contextual information about progress on key initiatives or those key actions. These might not necessarily be numeric, and they kind of really come about as we look annually at what progress has been made on different actions throughout the past year. There's also macro indicators. These are kind of your more high-level data sets that are updated regularly, looking at things, many of the data sets I shared recently, such as population, labor force participation rate, housing affordability, those types of things. They might not shift significantly, year over year, but gathering it year over year allows us to then look back over several years and see what changes are happening, kind of what the different broader trends might be. And then finally, programmatic indicators are more specific numeric indicators tied to those different actions. It could be things such as, for example, the number of EV stations, charging stations installed throughout the region and tracking that. So there's a lot there, and I know there was a lot earlier, but the SEDS does require an annual report that's available on our website, and that provides that data annually, as well as outlining action plans for the Cape Cod Commission for the previous year and progress reported there from the Commission as well as our partners, and then outlines kind of our next steps for the coming year. That's available on our website, but also most of this data that I've shared is available on our Data Cape Cod website, and there's more than what I've shared there as well, so please dig around. And certainly at capecodcommission.org/housing, again, a lot of this data available through our housing profiles as well. With that, I will hand it back to Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chloe. That is all such amazing information, and we're all going to take 3 days to digest it all. Before you go, there were a couple of questions for you in the chat, and I just wanted to get to them now. So you did mention that most of this data is available on Data Cape Cod, but we have one participant, and I guess generally the question is, can we share the industry and wages available for each of the 8 towns? I know we sort of cherry picked for the sake of time,
Yes.
but that data set exists, right?
That exists. That is available in the housing profiles for each town. If you go to capecodcommission.org/housing, you'll find a link for that. I'll also put the link in the chat directly for the housing profiles, and that provides those charts for every town as well as the region. And then there's also kind of some of that data can be found certainly in some of the different dashboards on Data Cape Cod as well.
Excellent. And then the other question was, in Wellfleet, the largest fishing excuse me, I can't walk and chew gum today. The fishing industry is a large employer. There we go. have you assessed this industry?
So short answer is we have not specifically looked at that. And I will say that one I think is trickier at times to get to with some of that industry and wage data, kind of based on how that data is collected. It's ES 202 data, not to get too technical, but just kind of the different data that collects. Sometimes that might not be getting captured there. And so unfortunately, I know that can be data is never perfect, and I wish it were. And I know that in many cases has come up that it could be kind of a potential larger gap there. So the short answer, I guess, is unfortunately no. We do our best, but kind of given the data sources, there isn't a perfect one for that. So local data would probably, if it exists, be the best there if possible.
All right. Sounds like a project to work on in the future.
Yes.
Maybe a collaboration. Thank you so much, Chloe. We really appreciate your insight and your time today. I'm going to hand this back over to Pam. And we're very excited about this segment. Pam has framed the rest of this as sort of myth busting and things that people sort of think are common sense knowledge about small business owners and small business. And Pam is going to do a little bit of myth busting that shows why those things aren't always the case. So back over to Pam.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you too, Chloe. All right, so we're going to debunk some of those common misconceptions or myths that may influence policy or expectations of small businesses in your community. When small business performance is misunderstood, it can lead to regulatory or policy decisions that unintentionally make it harder for local firms. This presentation uses local data and real-world context to inform discussion and decision-making. So the first myth is that entrepreneurs are usually rich and wealthy. Well, no, that is not true. Some entrepreneurs might become rich, but they certainly don't start that way, and it's far from the norm. In fact, even once the business is up and running, entrepreneurs aren't the fat cats that people think that they are. When we look at the median yearly salary for a small business owner in 2025, and this is a national number, the average income for that small business owner salary is $67,000. So if we look at that for a one-person household in Barnstable County, that one-person household falls below 80% of area median income. So they are in the moderate income category, and they also qualify for many affordable housing projects. If that one business owner is a family of four, and that is their only income source, now they fall below 50% of median income, and they are in the low income category and qualify for even more areas of affordable housing. Employees too are also falling into that low to moderate income category. In typical storefronts and hospitality, many of them meet that criteria across the region, and most of them have to have multiple jobs in order to survive. If you look at some of that data that Chloe showed us a few minutes ago, a household would have to have 4 full-time positions to be able to purchase a home in our region. And that's not sustainable for many people to work 2 full-time jobs for 2 people in a household. And if you're looking at annual revenue for small businesses in the US, 77% have less than $50,000 a year in annual sales. And if you think back to that profit and loss statement that I gave you at the beginning, that's where I based this number off of. By contrast, someone coming out of an MBA program could be earning a $200,000 salary right after graduation. And this is the annual revenue that these businesses are making. Myth 2, businesses have large profit margins. Many small businesses are micro enterprises with 1 to 5 employees. Profit margins are offered in the 5 to 10% range, not the large corporate margins many people think of. In the prior example of the 77% having sales less than $50,000, that means the profit margins are less than $5,000 a year. Some business income generated often goes back into the business because they have challenges with obtaining funding for that business to grow. And if they don't reinvest in themselves, they cannot grow. And due to this low number, their growth can be slow. Labor costs, insurance, materials, and overheads are significant, especially in our seasonal cycles. Seasonal swings often make it necessary for a business to make all their profit in 10 weeks of the year. We all need to find ways to help more small businesses afford to make the decision to stay open longer and provide the products and services that we want and need year-round. And that is challenging for many of them. If you look at this chart on here, 40% of businesses turn a profit, 30% break even, and 30% are in the red. And when you look at that local data point, that 64% of establishments have fewer than 5 employees, it's telling. It means most businesses around here don't have the large scale or deep cost absorbing capacity. When you assume that small business equals big profit, you risk misunderstanding how fragile these businesses really are. So when we look at some of those small business margins, if you take for example, in our definition section, we talked about the average net profit. And for a business with a revenue of $50,000 in a brick and mortar location, that means their net profit is only between $1,000 and $6,000 for the year because of that 2 to 6% of net profit margin that we see in this chart. If you're looking at construction with construction schedules and changes due to permitting or new requirements, there's not a lot of wiggle room. For small business owners' viewpoint, delays with a project cost them money. Most need to pay their crew for each hour work, and a loss is tangible and they cannot get that time back to use it again later. Many people think it's business mismanagement, but many times it's caused by external factors outside their control. And examples can include delay in materials, which we've seen often since 2020. Weather delays, if you think back to last week, can you imagine doing a yard cleanup or putting up plywood or working on a roof in some of those windy days? And they can also be permitting delays. Not only does it delay the project that they're working on, but it delays future projects as well. Myth 3, businesses can absorb costs due to fluctuations in the economy. Unexpected cost increases, whether it's fuel, parts, equipment, materials, can significantly affect the cash flow of businesses, especially those that are just over break even. High local overhead, seasonal swings, and a tourism-driven economy make it even more volatile. Service businesses are often operate with thin margins and rely on efficient operations. If there's an increase in costs of goods that will impact the bottom line, the business owner must be aware of these changes in the cost of products or shipping and be able to decide if they should increase the price or whether they can absorb that cost increase. And then be able to determine if they do decide to increase the price, will people still buy that product? New policies can have a big impact on micro enterprises. And when you take the additive impact across multiple areas, business owners need to stay on top of all of these categories on a regular basis in order to maintain profitability. In 2024, inflation and price increases represented the biggest concern for small business owners across the country. If you look at the chart if you look at the bottom of this page, you can see the highest areas of businesses within the Barnstable County, from accommodations in food, healthcare, and the retail trade. And all of these face tight margins and cost pressures. Myth 4, small businesses have plenty of staff. On Cape Cod, many firms are small, often 1 to 5 staff, including the owner. But the business owners wear all the hats. They're the marketing department, the finance department, the sales department, the planning department, and the inventory manager. And then they have to be able to hire people for some of these tasks and identify which ones make the most sense for them to hire so that they can spend their time on the higher value tasks. Cross-training is necessary to be able to fill gaps. They must be sensitive to scheduling their employees and be ready to fill in for absent staff. Many struggle with employees out sick, on vacation, dealing with childcare or jury duty, or even a car breakdown can cause a challenge for a small business with a small number of employees. I know of a business recently that had 5 employees. 1 was out with the death of a family member. Another employee was out on extended jury duty. So now they're running the whole business for this time period with 3 employees working 88 hours a week to cover those shifts. There's no work-life balance there, and it's not a sustainable long-term staffing model. The skilled trades have a labor shortage that is a persistent issue. The Cape Cod's year-round population and housing shortage significantly limits the available labor pool for the trades and some service-based industries. In a business with field personnel, even 1 missing technician means schedule disruptions, jobs will be delayed, not because of poor management, but because firms can't find and backfill for missing staff and have to delay the work. It's important to understand that small firms don't have large back office teams. Their streamlined compliance helps small businesses stay efficient and responsive. Myth number 5, it's easy to find new employees. Skilled trades across Massachusetts have shortages. Cape and Islands Workforce Board reports that the Cape needs 2,700 skilled workers over the next 5 years. Housing costs and seasonal retail market limit the workforce supply. The CDP has even had our own challenge recently hiring. We did a search for a new employee to work in my department. We found somebody. They were moving here from another part of the state. They were here for 6 weeks and then were unable to find year-round long-term housing and took another position in another part of the state. So, not only did we lose out on that opportunity, who was a perfect fit for the organization, but also we spent a lot of time training and bringing that employee up to speed for them to then leave. And now we have to come up with a new plan. Small firms spend significant time and money recruiting, onboarding, and training. Turnover affects the cost and productivity. Additional costs can include licenses, certification, background checks, depending upon the role of the employee. Hiring challenges are not due to a lack of desire. They are due to regional economic realities. Cape workforce data shared that 43% of Cape Cod employers report difficult in finding qualified workers. To attract new talent, many businesses report using a variety of tactics, including flexible work hours and hybrid or remote work options. Competing with large companies for wages, benefits, and stability can be challenging and not affordable. Many have to make choices that we never would have imagined before COVID. Back before COVID, who would have ever thought that a business owner in the high season of the summer would have to make decisions about what hours to be opened or what days of the week to be open? Now we have fewer employees to be able to fill out those shifts for an employer. We don't want the owner or the employees to have burnout. So in that 10 weeks of the year where they're making all of their profit, they are now making less. because they're not open the 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day that we were used to before COVID. Here on Cape Cod, we feel the housing crunch harder than in most regions. Most qualified workers cannot afford to live locally year-round, and some commute long distances. That can also affect reliability and availability of those employees. Shifting to how businesses can get money to be able to start up with grants or loans, many think that there are opportunities for the government has startup grants for small businesses. This couldn't be further from the truth. There are a few government special programs for veterans or people with disabilities, but there are not a lot of grant opportunities for small business owners, especially startup ones. There are plenty of online claims that they offer government funding, but most of them are not true. Even during COVID, grant funding through the PPP and the CDBG funding that we implemented, businesses were required to be in operation for 1 or more years, depending upon the source of funding, which was a challenging year. There were a lot of businesses that in March of 2020 were preparing to open in April, and then everything was shut down and they were not able to get any funding to help them through that. Some think that there are venture capitalists want to loan money to startups. That might be true on Shark Tank. But as a general rule, venture capitalists want businesses to show a track record of doing business with at least 3 years and promise of a robust future. So then we can think about loans. So the SBA loan, many people think the SBA loans money directly to people. That's not quite true. The SBA has funding that comes through banks. Even during COVID, the only opportunity for small business funding directly from the SBA were those EIDL loans, which had a low interest rate, which is great, but they have a long payback period. So even though we're 5 years out from when COVID started, these businesses are paying those loans back for 20 years or more. Business owners seeking SBA loans do so through their local bank or community development financial institution. And there are 3 different types of loans. The 7A loan is a versatile loan for small businesses that are expanding. It can be used for real estate and equipment. The 504 loan has a fixed rate and long-term financing for machinery and equipment. And then the microloan is structured for small businesses that provide short-term financing for working capital, inventory, supplies, etc. If a business owner wants to go to a bank, banks do require that the business be in business for at least 2 years and be able to show their tax returns to be considered for a loan. Additionally, most owners with more than a 20% ownership are required to sign a personal guarantee. So even if they are a corporation or an LLC, they are still required to sign that personal guarantee, guaranteeing that the money will be paid back to the lender. So you might wonder, how do businesses get funded? If they can't get grants and loans, how do they get funded? Well, you can see from this chart, many of the businesses that have 4 or fewer employees funded their business with their personal savings. Even at 5 to 19, a lot of them did. Many use credit cards. Oftentimes with the credit cards for that 0 to 4 employees, that's their personal credit cards they're using. When you get to larger organizations that is 20 to 500, those are more likely a business credit card. So you can see the different types of funding that are available to small businesses. Other funding options, when you think about these businesses getting started, we find that 33% of businesses launched with less than $5,000 to start themselves, and 58% launched with less than $25,000. Some other ways that businesses be able to obtain some funding was to get a loan of credit on their home, maybe get a personal loan. Some might use crowdfunding. Some might get a microloan, like our microloan program. So we tend to lend from $3,000 to $50,000 to small businesses. Our average loan is around $21,000. The maximum repayment term for ours is 5 years, which is a little bit less than a bank. And our average repayment term has been about 3.6 years. We do have a higher interest rate because our loans are a little more risky than the ones that the bank can do. But we do offer a seasonal repayment structure where businesses can pay interest only through the winter and then larger payments during the summer when they are in operation. And many people have taken advantage of that. Myth number 8, entrepreneurs work less and have more freedom. What is the reality of that? Entrepreneurs often involve long hours and a high level of commitment, and they are accountable for the success of their venture and must be willing to put in the necessary effort and dedication. Entrepreneurs wear all of those hats that we talked about earlier. They handle a wide range of responsibilities from strategic planning to day-to-day operations. Business owners often struggle with those two different large tasks, and it's hard to go from running the business in those day-to-day operations and move on to doing some strategic planning. Many times they get stuck in a rut because they're stuck in that survival mode of the day-to-day operations. It also can be challenging when the business owner is the face of the business. What happens so often when it's a small business, and then they get pulled into doing more managing and doing more work in the day-to-day operations than they do in the strategic planning. They need to be able to devote time to developing systems and strategies to increase cash flow and decrease inefficiencies, build relationships, and develop pitches. As an entrepreneur, finding a balance between work and personal life is challenging yet important. It's critical that they set boundaries and prioritize self-care to avoid burnout, and they need to find ways to delegate tasks to their employees. Myth number 9. You don't need a business plan. Well, I feel that every business owner should have a business plan, regardless of size or whether they plan to apply for grants or loans. The reason for that is that they need to have a clear vision of what they want the business to be and where they were going and how they want to do it. If you are aware early that you're diverging from your plans, you can get back on track. Whereas if you only have a vague idea of what you want from your business, you might not realize it until it's too late. They should have weekly and monthly targets for sales, cash flow, and marketing, and be flexible because experience may show that the original plan needed adjustment, but it is partly the purpose of a good plan. So they understand when they need to change. Now, the format of this can vary. It doesn't have to be an elaborate, full-blown 40-page business plan. It can be an outline of what the business is going to do. They can develop a business model canvas. I even worked with an artist that developed a graphic business plan because that is how she envisioned the business, or a 1 or 2 pager. The key is we don't want them to get stuck in the weeds, and they don't need something that is too detailed. So that wraps up the myths. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how can municipalities help small businesses. Supporting local business can mean shopping locally, having businesses' perspectives at the table for discussions that affect them, to continue to build relationships between the towns and the business owners, to know and share the current landscape. We need to continue to find ways to house small business workers and owners. When reviewing rules and regulations, try not to make it more difficult to be a small business owner in your town or region. Support small business friendly policies, and this can include local vendors and contractors. Be truly supportive using the local vendors and contractors, and be truly supportive of the local ecosystem. Most small business owners have not owned a small business before and are constantly learning. Many can use assistance when working through the permitting process prior to opening their business. Continue to support local events. Local events bring people to our communities, allow business owners to interact with others so that they're not feeling isolated, and build community. Small businesses are the backbone of our communities. Live, Love, Local shared that 50 to 85% of revenues from personal and business services stay in our local communities. So we want to continue to shop local, and those shops pay our local taxes. When small businesses thrive, we keep local jobs, local spending, and local stability. As town officials, you are key partners in ensuring that the local business economy or ecosystem stays healthy. It is easier and less expensive to keep an existing business than to replace one with a new business. What are some towns doing? So Provincetown has an economic development committee, and they have economic development grants. They've been running this program, started in 2016. They started with $5,000 grants, and they did some research in 2018 and decided to focus that on arts and culture communities and nature and marine resources. Today, the program has evolved, and they still have a preference for arts and culture in the blue economy. And the current grant cycle offers up to $10,000 per business and is geared toward proposals that will start, support, and sustain year-round businesses and off-season economic opportunity in Provincetown. The town of Orleans now has Amanda Converse, their economic development coordinator. And in 2025, that department did a small business survey to help set strategic priorities to support the long-term vitality of business in Orleans. Of the businesses that they surveyed, they found that 85% were year-round. 50% of the businesses were more than 16 years old, which is higher than that slide that we talked about earlier across the Cape of it being 53% at 11 years. 62% of those businesses have fewer than 5 employees. And the feedback they got were that the biggest challenges were housing and hiring and retention. And that's something that we've seen across the region as well. 85% of businesses like doing business in Orleans. And for business sentiment, 54% are optimistic and 48% are feeling that the economy has worsened in the past year. In Chatham, they do have their own economic development committee. And in Eastham in 2021 and 22, they did have an exterior improvement program. So a lot of the towns are making efforts and strides to keep small businesses in their communities. So how can you as an individual help? Well, you can shop local. When you look at the Live, Love, Local statistic that shifting 10% of your individual spending to local retail establishments would put an additional $112 million into the Cape Cod economy every year. You can also support local business. Well, what does that mean? That you can share social media, share favorable reviews online, buy gift cards to local shops, or gifts to friends and family. Remember that small business is lean and mean, and most small businesses work hard for their customers. And that all the money that we spend at those local shops stays local in our community. versus a larger multi-location business where their headquarters is not here. So in closing, the myths we reviewed today, that small businesses have large margins, can absorb anything, and have lots of staff and can easily find funding, they distract from the actual operating reality of local businesses on Cape Cod. By understanding the operational reality, we can design policies and workflows that respect the value small businesses bring, reduce unintentional burdens, and work together for the benefit of our community. Our current economics are going to bring challenges, I think, to many of the businesses in this winter and spring. I already know several that have pivoted their model, and others that are closing due to rent increases. Earlier, we talked about the businesses that the CDP has worked with in our community: landscaping, artists, fishing, aquaculture, retail, restaurants, activities, services. What would we lose if we lost those businesses who have put their life savings and invested their own personal money on their credit cards to create the products and services that we rely and depend on? Think of the ones that you utilize their business, and what would you do without them? Keep thinking about the question, how do we keep the businesses that are here in our community?
Pam, thank you so much for that. And thank you to Chloe. All of this is a lot to think about. This is why it's a 101. We're really diving in feet first with this one. But I think as we close out today, one of the themes in our Housing Institute programming is values and vision. What do our towns care about? What are our stated goals? And how is the region working towards those visions to make them reality in the future? And I think we've done a really good job shifting and making housing in the center of those conversations. And we've been able to tie the need for housing, both in the present and in the future, to the success of our region. And so similarly, as we think about our business communities, Pam said it a couple of times, small business is the backbone of our economy, but it's a little bit more nebulous how to tie those pieces together. So thanks again to both Pam and Chloe. This has been so illuminating to have insight into what it means to be a small business owner, what it takes to start and maintain that business, what factors make it challenging, as well as what these businesses mean to our communities. And so that whole list of businesses that Pam just gave us that she's been supporting through our CDP programming, she mentioned, what does it do to our communities to lose these services and these places and products? On the flip side, in all of our capacities as municipal officials and staff, I think it's really valuable for us to keep considering, what kind of experiences and services and basics and amenities that businesses provide do we want to have in our communities now and in the future, and not just for the peak summer season, but for our year-round communities as well. So in the same way that we've worked really hard to educate people on how housing works so that we can move towards our housing production goals and keep the people we really need in our communities to have vibrant year-round communities, we should also be thinking about how we can help make operating a business more streamlined, a little bit easier, and to have a supportive environment for them to all thrive as well. So thank you all so much for being here. If there are a couple of questions or comments in the chat, we can address those in the follow-up email. Pam and I have a hard stop, but thank you so much for the thoughts, and we will make sure that you get answers to them. Next up in our Lower Cape Housing Institute curriculum, we have Winter Peer Group coming up on December 10th. And then our next workshop is in January. That is Water Resources 201. And thanks again to our CPCs for their support. Please encourage your fellow board and committee members to attend. I will send out the recording and the slide decks that were discussed today. And please feel free to get in touch with us if you have any other questions. But thank you for being here and embarking on this Econ Dev housing crossover journey, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.